But I'll be there when I check in my load. Ain't no girl can hold my body down. Ain't no girl
Get nervous?
can hold
The song's almost over.
body down.
I know.
You know what I mean?
I am getting nervous.
Ain't no girl.
I was just saying, note to self, like, bring tripod. This.
Oh, I thought that was some sort of fancy weird.
No, it's a camera, glasses case.
Yeah? Okay, great. Hey everybody, welcome. I'm excited to be here. I laugh every time I hear "Oh, hey, Google doing my booty." I had to use it to talk somewhere. Really, it's talking about a bunch of best practices in mobile and web. And when we come to voice, what things should we bring with us and what should we leave behind? And one thing I noticed when I was going through my deck is that the very title of the talk is illustrates one of those examples of things you should leave behind when you come to voice. So it says, "Who put GUI my GUI? ? Design titles that don't work in voice." There's a couple things that are wrong with that for voice. It's actually right and well designed in a visual, scrolly, GUI kind of world. When I wrote it, I was thinking about how you might look through the app and skim through all the titles, and you might look at the website and skim through all the titles. And I wanted you to see a hook, and then go, I'm going to keep reading, like, what is this about? And then maybe even open up and read the abstract, right? And so, Hoopa Guma is meant to be the, got you, what does that even mean? And then, design titles don't work. So, in voice, though, that doesn't work. It doesn't play out the same way because you're not about skimming. There's no concept of skimming in voice. And if you put a question mark in the middle of your phrase, people might want to answer when they hear the question. So, like, when do I jump in? When's my turn? Because it's sort of a turn-based thing and there's not a lot of interruption. So anyway, total side thing. I'm really excited to be here, particularly with you in this group. I think that there's a lot of potential in voice, and I think that we're at the very, very beginning of how are we going to craft what this thing is over the next 5, 10, I don't know, forever years. And I think it's going to take people that are really keenly attuned to the design aspects and figuring out how to bring a new kind of design forward. So I appreciate that you're all here, and I'm hoping that one person in this room, maybe more, will sort of go away with maybe 1 or 2 things out. So I jammed way too many concepts into this talk. Go away and be like, something happened, and then like we together as an industry can sort of form what voice will look like in the future. In general, I'm really excited about this time. I feel like we're at the beginning of another shift. I certainly remember a few others. I remember teaching people, actually prescribing that they use a mouse. In fact, they play solitaire. And the idea was they had no concept of how to not look at their hand when they're moving it, because the cursor's over here moving, and they would move their hand, look, move their hand, look. Click and drag, double click was a thing you had to figure out. And so there was this like new way of interacting with computing. It also happened about a decade ago with phones. And then you had the internet in your pocket, you're like, this is amazing, I have the internet. And it was also pretty rough, because if you recall, what happened was everybody just took what they already had built, like a web page, and threw it onto the phone. And so what that means is you've got your phone, but now you're pinching and zooming like crazy all the time. Or because the tap targets are just too tiny, right? They didn't design for a finger that's always 7 millimeters. Or all the best practices of the day, like hover menus. Super cool. Well, I don't know how you hover on a phone when you're trying to touch. So all of a sudden, hover menus don't make any sense, right? So it took the industry to rethink design and how it works to make it fit appropriately for those different affordances that people were using. It took companies like Half-Brick and Rovio to say, I think Fruit Ninja, where you're slicing things, or Angry Birds, where you touch and drag on the screen, and that's your angle and power for your slingshot, and you let go of the screen as your shoot button. Like, wait, where are all the other buttons that are labeled shoot, right? No, it was touch, drag, and let go. So they really thought about what does it mean to be responsive design, direct manipulation, all those kinds of things. So here we are at another moment where, hey, I can start to talk to things, and I have ability to access my computing even when it's farther away than my arms are. Be across the room and I can be doing something. It's about very high speed, low friction, getting things done. And I would say that today we're in that magical moment. Wow, this is something here. This is pretty cool. Like, I'm doing a lot of things, making my life better. But it's also those pinchy, zoomy kinds of days, right? It's like you can see that this isn't the way it's going to be. And so the question is, who is going to go figure out what it's going to be? Who is going to be the Angry Birds of voice, or the Half-Brick of voice, or all these kinds of folks? And who's going to stand up and sort of become that? I think we as a community are going to like pool together to kind of make that happen. So my hope today is I can plant a couple seeds that you can run with and make them actually good. Okay? So these are just like observations we've been seeing so far. So that's what we're trying to do. Say what things in web and mobile are best practices that in voice, maybe not so much. So a little context setting, it's different. Here's a scene where there's a bunch of people together at an event together, yet when they want to use their computing, they're apart. So you basically will like, excuse me, the long verbose way of this is, excuse me for a moment, I'm going to check something on my phone, check it on the phone. Can I be invited back into the conversation now? Thank you, and I'm back in, right? And so what we normally do is like cheat and look, or all these other kinds of things. But you're basically getting out of the conversation. And even when I find new information, I looked up a fact or something like that, I bring it back to the group. I didn't go like, hey everybody, I'm going to read this to you, and now here's the thing I've learned, and now I bring it back, right? So it's weirdly more social and everything, because now I can carry it with me. I've got it on me. I don't have to go back home to do my computing. But yet it's still basically individual. It's a very private experience. I even feel weird when I give my phone to somebody. And I love the features, like you can now take pictures right from the lock screen. Because now I have this confidence that you can't get to my privateness stuff, right? Like it's an individually kind of thing. A voice experience tends to be communal. Everybody can hear what you're saying. All the things are happening. So now you can imagine scenarios where you're at a kitchen table and you are playing a game together. Everybody's playing the game together. Or if you get a piece of information, everybody's getting a piece of information. So one thing to think about when you're designing is, how do you make it something that works in a more communal way? Of course, people will use it at home when they're alone. I play music all the time when nobody else is around. But there still is these other moments where you want to like bring things together. And there's people like pushing into this space more and more. You see a lot of the games, interactive fictions, or the Win and Roam board game, these kinds of things where they're acknowledging that. Some of them are pretty explicit about it, and they say, hey, player one, who are you? Player two, who are you? Whatever. Some don't. Some just say, let's play Jeopardy, and you start answering questions, and you don't really assign players, but you're still playing it together with the devices. So just something to keep in mind. Throughout this talk, I want to have a shared understanding of like my mind frame, my mindset about how these interactions happen. And you'll see this replay throughout a bunch of the different best practices. So the way that Alexa really works is the user says something, okay? Then there's some situation that's happening. So they might say, launch the skill, and it's the first time you've ever launched the skill. And then there's a response and a prompt. So, hey, launch the skill is the very first time. Welcome to the skill. I do all these wonderful, amazing things. Then I prompt you. Here's where we get to go do something, right? Or launch the skill, it's the third time. Hey, 3 times in a row, great job. Prompt, right? So there's this, it's always a response to a situation. This is a pretty big difference from web pages and mobile, because in those things, your job is to tell the user how to get through this process as quickly as possible. And you're basically, do this. These are the steps to go do. Versus the user saying, hey, I want something. Here's a response to it. So we'll dive into the details of this. There are 4 different patterns that I want to expose you to. The first one is about being adaptable. Did I? Yeah. Then I paused for just a moment so that the folks who were trying to get that picture, but I went too quickly, had the chance to actually grab that. All right. So the first pattern here is being adaptable. So this is where we let people speak in their own words. The power of voice is that it's natural. We hear a lot about natural UI and these kinds of things. And the reason it's natural is because I can say what I want to say, right? So let's look at this. In design in general, there's this concept of affordances. And I'm sure you've had the experience where you run up to a door and pushed it and it said, pull, right? But affordances are the things that you use to grab onto and manipulate objects, right? So a door handle is a great example of this. But anything like car steering, radio, buttons, like this is how you interact with your stuff. And it plays out in software. Very often at the beginning of a new kind of technology, you tend to use a skeuomorphic approach. And skeuomorphic just means that you're trying to mimic something physical and in the real world. So you'll see, like way back when, the sort of first media players in Windows had like dials that looked like actual dials. So you have this understanding of how to use it. And then over time, these things get simplified down. Like they might just become, hey, there's a little volume label or a little slider. And even the label might go away. You start to realize the little slider probably means volume. So as people start to learn the new affordance, they can move in. Well, voice has these same concepts of affordances as well. And those are in the form of an intent. So in this case, I would say turn up the volume. And my program knows volume up is a thing. And that would be an intent. That's what the user intended. There's a little bit more, though, and that is that the user can say a wide range of ways to turn the volume up. They can say louder, make it louder, turn it down, turn it up, set it to 6, right? So those are utterances and slots. So like set the volume to 6 would be an utterance that triggers the intent to turn up the volume, and then the slot value would be 6. I could say 4, 5, whatever, right? So that's the basic affordance that we have at our disposal as designers. Let's look at these in practice a little bit. So here's an example where I'm learning about colleges, and I would say something like, for the best colleges in California, and I'm so these are all different ways to say I want to refine a search to get the college I want. Basically, the intent here would be refine my search, and I have a variety of ways to say that. So that's my intents. Then I can take all those utterances and I can come back into the slots. So the blue words here are the slots. So animal sciences, I'm not actually going to make an utterance for every university, every possible combination of every university degree program there is. Instead, I'm going to have a framework of the utterance or several utterances with these slots, like degree or location, size, that kind of thing. Okay? So that's the concept of intents and utterances and slots. And then there's another notion which is around synonyms in entity resolution. And this is one of the places where you really start to get that expressivity from people without complicating your code. And this is one of the places that I would say is sort of newer right now. I think most people have been building skills or building voice experiences and been thinking about utterances and intents, and then probably also slots, but maybe not always. Synonyms are, I would say, on the more front edge of things. Synonym, here's what happens. So you normally have your slots say tiny, small, medium, large, and as long as the user says one of those, you're good to go, move on your way. But what if they say, I want an average size school, right? Or I want a gigantic school. Then you don't want to have to handle in your code all the ways to handle every possible thing that means large. So what will happen is you can use synonyms. When they say gigantic, you'll get back. The person said gigantic, they meant large. What do you want to do? And you could just, your code could go like, I'll just take what they meant. I don't actually care. So you could, when you phrase things back for confirmations, you can say things like, oh, a gigantic school, let's try a large one called it, right? You can say them both. You can just repeat back what they said, or you can just say, okay, a large school, if they said gigantic, right? One other subtlety here is if you say a little school, that's actually a synonym for both tiny and small. And that's a situation where you're going to get back. They said little, they may have meant tiny, and they may have meant small. And then you have the choice to say, well, I'm going to disambiguate. Did you mean tiny or small, right? You can ask them to clarify in different words. All right, so that gets us back to, let's be able to talk the way they talk. All right. Next round of things is around being personal. And really, personal might be too detailed of a word. Really what we're looking for is you've got context about the customer, about the user, right? So personal is certainly an extreme of it. But you could even just be like, I'm not forgetting what our previous conversations were. So an example of this is, I come to the skill, and I say, welcome to the skill for the very first time. Here's the big, long, verbose explanation of what it does. And the next time you come back and say, welcome back, let's go. Right? That's just a personalization around, like, I've been here before. Maybe better is to say 5 times in a row, that's awesome, and rewarding the streaks and trying to get your engagement and retention kinds of stats up. So really want this experience of being tailored over time. It really is a bummer when you have an experience where you made it to level 7, and then made it to level 7, and then all of a sudden you have to start over, and it doesn't start you back where you left off on level 7, right? So it's this notion of you tailor it over time. All right, consistency. You might think that consistency is the king of all things, and for web and mobile, it kind of is. Consistency is a really powerful tool for teaching people how to use your experience, right? You build a web page, you make sure that the controls are labeled the same every time, your color palette's not bouncing around, the locations of buttons, and like you want people to learn it and then be able to use it. In fact, your whole premise is, I've got this process that's actually maybe pretty complicated to do, and I need to teach you how to do it. Once I teach you how to do it, you should be able to do it really easily from then on. Right? That's the basic design premise of web and mobile. So consistency is really a great tool for that. It's baked in the premise that you're relying on the person's ability to skim. So they can ignore whole chunks of what you're doing and then just key right in on the key piece. This works in graphical kind of things. It also works in text. So if you see paragraphs of text, you probably read the topic sentence, and then you might skip the rest of the paragraph unless you're like, what is that? You dig in a little deeper and you skim, right? Well, voice has no concept of skimming. And in fact, consistency is the thing that turns you off. And so what you really want in voice is variety. You can imagine if you use the skill and every single day it said, welcome back, we do 8 things, blah, 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 blah. Welcome back, we do 8 things, blah, blah, blah. You're just like, oh, I got it, let's go, right? So there's this moment where people check out when you start to bring in the consistency. So you do want to be predictable, understandable, learnable, right? You want to have all those kinds of interactions, but if you don't have a variety, it gets really boring and stale fast. So this one's a tough one. Between both of these, the core underlying human principle still stays the same, which is you want it to be learnable, right? And in voice, what you strive to do is the first part we talked about with all the slots and synonyms, which is all about you say whatever you want and I'm going to handle it, right? Then the next part is I'm going to embrace you and we'll have the right variety to let you get through the process you want. All right. Some of these best practices actually apply themselves a little bit differently depending on the kind of experience you're building. So let's take a few different roles that your skill might take and see how some of the best practices play out a little differently. So in one, you say, give me something, nah. Right? I want a joke, I want a fact, I want to turn on the lights, I want the weather, I want this thing. Right? So you just go out and fetch it, come back. And in those cases, you're going to want to be really brief. Okay, got it, here's your thing. Right? Like, you're just trying to get in and get out. And that's an example where the one breath test is really important. So the idea with the one breath test is Alexa says a bunch of stuff, she should be able to say it in a bout of breath. If you say it in a bout of breath, that's about the right time for people to actually be able to digest what you just got. The next one is sort of like mentor, helpful kind of a person. And so this is where you might be like planning a trip. Okay, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What's the like to get there? I'll book it. So you're like more of a back and forth to get more into the dialogue style of phase. And there's another one which just says, entertain me. Like I want to like go through this whole story that you built out and explore this world and that kind of stuff. And that's an example where the one breath test doesn't make a lot of sense because you actually want to be able to say a lot of things. So then you use different techniques to make it digestible. So it's things like putting in sound effects and different voices and those kinds of things. All right. The next chunk of them is around being relatable. So this is about talking with a person instead of just saying, here's how it is, and talking to them. So here's an example where you might just ask the person to say all the things you need in order to call your API. Right? That's basically what it boiled down to. I want to be able to call my college picking API and then return a college for you. And good luck getting the user to say all those things. And I have a quick video to give you like a flavor of how that feels.
Alexa, open the foodie.
Welcome to the foodie. What's your name? It's time to stuff your face with delicious food, and I want to help you with that.
It's coming.
What styles are cute? Hey.
Alexa, open the foodie.
Welcome to the foodie. What's your name? It's time to stuff your face with delicious food, and I want to help you with that. Please tell me what you'd like to eat, the time of day, what styles of cuisines you prefer, the portion size you want, and whether you have any dietary restrictions.
Breakfast?
Well, it's time to stuff your face with delicious food, and I want to help you with that. Please tell me what you want to eat, the time of day, what styles of cuisine you prefer, the portion size you want, small or large, and whether you have any dietary restrictions. It's time to stuff your face with delicious food, and I want to help you with that.
So in a web page, you could have a big long form full of all sorts of questions, and you could have people go fill out all those questions. Much harder to do in voice. So what you're really looking for is conversation, a back and forth. You guys have a goal that you're trying to achieve together, and the solution for that is multi-turn dialogues. So the idea is that you say, there is a very wizard-like feeling happy path. It might feel like a website thing where you say, where do you want to go? What do you want to do when you get there? What date are you leaving? What date are you coming back? And that would all work fine. And that's a great kind of thing and great thing. But here's where the problem plays in. Let's say you say something like, let's do that trip planning thing. And you say something like, hey, I want to plan a trip. And Alexa says, great, where do you want to go? I could say, I want to go kayaking. So now the very next, I didn't say where I wanted to go. Where do you want to go? Kayaking. The very next question should not be, what do you want to do when you get there? Because I already know what you want to do. I should now say, what city you're interested in, right? I should have another way of saying, where do you want to go? Or, let's do it again. I say, I want to plan a trip, and Alexa says, where do you want to go? And then I'd say, I want to go to Portland to go kayaking. So I over-answered. I said too many things. Cool, you should be able to handle that too. So the concept of dialogue management allows you to handle or answering in different orders or over-answering and all those kinds of things. And a wizard approach where you're just like, I do this, then this, then this, then this becomes very fragile and doesn't really react well to conversations. And throughout this, maybe I'll say this point a few times. One of the moments of joy your customers will have is when it's not on your happy path. And it's also the moment that they're going to hate your skill the most, right? So you're going to get the happy paths right. I think there's no concerns about that. You'll write out scripts, you'll write out flowcharts, you'll do whatever you do to get the happy path nailed. And when people are using the happy path, everything will be great. When they go to do something natural, if you respond well, they're going to like, magic. This is amazing and awesome. If you do something that's like, sorry, go back onto the path, redirect, then you're like, ugh, hate this skill, I'm on to my next thing, right? So that's why I'm trying to hit these things where like, yeah, you nailed the happy path. How do you get all the edge cases like over answering, all the things? I have to have a slide in here around GUI. I think visuals and screens are actually still important too. What we're really talking about is a way to ambiently interact with your computing, right? So I'm across the room, I'm doing things, I'm in the kitchen, I'm hands-free, I'm doing whatever. So visuals are a great way to, including your experience, they can convey a lot of information, all sorts of things. It's just that the design of them is a little bit different. Because now, instead of the UI saying, here's what you need to do to accomplish this process that I just laid out for you, instead it's like, hey, we're having this conversation, and I wrote something on the whiteboard to like keep track of where we're at, maybe give you some visual clues, maybe give you an idea about what you want to do next. So it's a companion to the experience that's going on right now. Picking a particular cheese or a movie that you might want to go to, those kinds of, or if you're playing a game, it like celebrates with the current score and just lets you know what's going on and helps keep things front of mind. But it's not like you would, I suppose you could, but it's not like you would want to repeat everything that's happening in the experience. I'm just saying, this is how this should go. All right, being available. So this is where we're going to start getting into some of the meat of how do you take these sort of setting the stage. How do we take these things and actually get into applying them? Being available is another important one. This is around helping people have access to all of your capabilities. There's one concept that's around a graph-based UI, and another that's around a frame-based UI. A graph-based UI is one where you say, I'm going to do this, then this, these are the choices, and so forth. In a world, let's talk about a couple different kinds of things that can happen here. One is, let's say I've got an experience where I'm building a mobile website, and I want to get it's a banking thing, I want to get my routing number. The best practice, for sure, is to not put the routing number on that home screen. Because I've only got so many pixels, first of all, and maybe even more importantly, I've only got so many concepts that I can put on a screen at once. So as a designer, you have to think thoughtfully about what do you want to be that initial first experience and experience on every page. So your solution for that is to create an information architecture where you create menu systems that will say, oh, menu, routing number. And so make it really easy for people to learn and understand what that menu system is, and now I can get into it. Can you imagine a voice? It's not too hard to imagine, actually. Can you imagine a voice where you had to say, hey, menu, routing number? Oh, that's all of a sudden not a fun experience because I don't know what your stuff is. So instead what you do is you take that whole information architecture and just spin it on its side. So now I can just say, because I can have a really wide top-level UI, right? There's no concept overload, there's no number of pixels that I'm wiping out. Now I can just say, what's my routing number? And I get straight to it. In fact, it actually helps for discovery because now I can serendipitously poke around and find, oh, this routing number thing is available to me. In a system that's very graph-based, what will happen is routing number ends up down here, and so whenever I say, hey, routing number, it's gonna, how do I get to it? How do I make these things top level, right? So you've just got to figure out a way to have the top level and not the super deeply nested thing. So let's dive into this one more and start talking through the different elements of this. There's a very common way to think about sketching and drafting your UI is with a flowchart. You can imagine opening up Visio and just like, this happens. And for happy paths and even the slightly off the happy paths, this works really well. It's fast, it's easy, it feels good. Like when you're designing, you feel like you're completing things, you can collect all the issues and capture them. There's a couple things that are sort of amiss with it. One is the order is backwards. So the way skills actually work is the user says something and then Alexa responds to that. It's not that Alexa's saying do this and then the user's picking one of the choices to do it. You can make it do that, and maybe there's some scenarios, maybe there's some scenarios in like interactive fiction where you say, you're in the room, you limit their choices intentionally because that's a part of the experience. But in like the trip planning things and all these other kinds of more utilitarian things, and even a lot of the games, quite honestly, it's about the user exploring, the user taking charge, and then Alexa responding to that. And the very simple flowcharting thing flips that upside down. And so what happens is you get your first stuff built, you get your prototype jammed out, it's easy to code because you just follow what the flowchart says, and then you run into the problems when you start to want to do something that's a little more natural, and it gets overwhelming very quickly. If you even think about the complexity at this stage, if you just take that welcome scenario I was describing, where you say, hey, it's your first time, you have a streak of 5 times, you're coming back to a welcome and you've purchased the premium pack. There's all these variations that you can do just in your welcome. So a lot of times these flowcharts will break out a whole section for just the welcome experience, and then those things will break out. So the complexity just really amps up. And part of that is because the users can say a whole ton of things. They're bringing their own language to it, and we're doing the natural language understanding, versus web and mobile, where we're relying on the user to do natural language understanding. Like we presented an option, like we said deploy or launch or something like that, and they have to figure out deploy is the right thing for me, or publish. But we're bringing that here, so you have a lot more options on the inside. And then the flip side is we're not trying to be super consistent. You might be consistent in your affordances, but not consistent in the way you phrase things. So that expands out pretty dramatically the way you respond as well. So that makes flowcharts very complicated to get right. The top level UI, this is that routing number example, just letting people bounce in and say things. The other example here is Let's say I'm in the middle of planning a trip. Hey, I want to go to Portland to go kayaking, and then it'll say something like, well, when do you want to leave? And I say, well, when are the cheapest airfares? When are the cheapest flights? Well, that's probably a whole other thing, which is to find cheap flights. And so now I'm jumping out of that experience into another, and I should be able to do that thing and then come back and then complete my thing. So I want to have a top level for planning, a top level for researching some piece or learning more about the city, another one for booking. So I should be able to say all those things at any time. Okay? All right, so let's show this. Let's dig in another couple layers deeper. So the idea is, how do we keep this sort of simplistic, yet complete? And my goal for this part is not to design a tool that developers can be like you like fiddle with it, and all of a sudden you have a skill come out the other side. That's not what I'm looking for here. I think that would be really cool. What I'm looking for here is designers can come up with something that creates a design artifact that then you can then go discuss with your team how to build it. Okay? Because a flowchart is insufficient for that today. Right? A flowchart, you'll end up hitting designer fatigue, where they're trying to map out all these possibilities and close enough. And then you end up with developer fatigue, because they're like, they should build it to support all these crazy cases, but they'll end up just going, forget it, I'm going to implement the flowchart. I'm going to follow all the ifs and conditions, right? So step one of this would just be the normal thing, which is build a happy path script. Everybody needs to, at the very beginning, have this sense of, is this a useful thing? Is this an interesting skill? Is it better in voice? Because maybe it's not. Well, one of the skills that we'll talk about in this is a college coaching skill. And you can imagine our first thing was to come at it from a developer's perspective. And we said, we have an API, and the API will give us schools. And all we got to do is get this information, and we're going to help customers be great. Immediately, that skill is, fill out this form, here's your result. Which I don't know why you wouldn't just use the web for that. Right? Like, sure, we could figure out how to do it, but I don't know. So we ended up doing something that said, hey, we realized that you prospective students have this moment in time where you have 6 months here where you're stressed out about going to school. So every day, we're going to give you something to do that's going to progressively get you closer and closer to getting to your goal, right? All right, so for that, we scripted out a happy path script. And from that happy path script, you can read it very quickly and just go like, yeah, that's dumb, or actually, I think there's something there, right? So you can iterate there. Then we said, well, let's sketch an overview of this thing. And I'll just walk you through what it is, and over the course of the rest of this, we'll start iterating on what all the shapes mean and how does this all play out. So there's a couple key pieces. One is, we just pick a handful of storyboards. We don't need to be exhaustive. We're just looking for, in fact, the idea is find the core scenario storyboards that we can use to articulate what this skill does. And through the process of creating these happy path storyboards, we will catch all the edge cases as well. Okay? So this skill says, welcome to College Coach. We are here, this is the first time. We're going to help you get closer to your college goals every day. We're going to give you an assignment. So, where do you want to go to school? And they say, oh, I want to go to Colorado. Okay, great. Hey, by the way, we have this coaching experience where you can get a coach that's really like a hard ass and going to keep on you, or one that's just like chill and is like, hey, it's cool, everything's fine, let's just keep rolling. Right? Are you interested in one of these coaches? And they say yes or no, and then you can sort of unlock that experience. And then they go, okay, well, we have all these possible ideas, because they barely filtered our list down, right? We didn't get to one college. We just narrowed it a little bit. So we have this big list, and we're going to narrow it down to, today, your assignment is to go think about Colorado State University and look at their social program, look at their social life, and see if Instagram looks pretty cool or not. Come back tomorrow, and you'll rate the school. And then, if they bought the premium package, then you're going to get the coach on. Hey, today's got to do, get on it, right? Or hey, man. All right. So that's the first time experience. The next time experience is, well, I already have an assignment. I was given an assignment, which was to go to Colorado State University. So, comes back, welcome. Hey, your assignment from last time was Colorado State University. How would you rate it? Wow, this thing is touchable. That's pretty awesome. I don't know how to untouch it. There you go. All right. Hey, your assignment from last time was Colorado State University. How did you like it? And then they say, oh, it's great, or it's 5, or whatever they would say. Cool. Hey, do you like large schools or small schools? Right, so we refine it. What degree do you want? So get a little bit of refining, and then now we narrow down the choices again. Hey, your new assignment is CU Boulder. Go off and do your thing, and then we play the college coach we have. You can also do things like favorites, help, quick. Right? So the idea at this stage is we can have a discussion about like, what is this thing basically? Right? It doesn't go through any of the detail of like what you say. It's literally a sketch. And then somebody else could say, oh, I want to do this other thing. Okay, let's sketch that out. All right, so now let's start breaking into these things and talking about how they play out. Again, to remind you, the core interaction of all of this is the user says something, and there's a situation, and then we're going to respond to that situation. So everything will tie back into that. So let's look at that first-time storyboard, but now with an intense level understanding of what's going on. So they set a launch. So notice it starts with the user, always at the top. They set a launch. We performed our welcome logic, right? And the welcome logic says, you said one thing, we're going to give you a bunch of these random answers back. And then, because it's the very first time, we're going to do the every day, you're going to come back, and we tell you how the program works. And then we do a prompt that says, hey, where do you want to go? And the prompt is actually from the refine thing. So then, I don't know. Okay, no problem. That didn't help us with our refinement, but we understand you have teen angst, so no problem. What state do you want to go to? Colorado. Awesome, nice. Do you want to get a coach? Yeah, I want to get a coach. Okay, your assignment is CU Boulder. Here's the premium podcast, and you go on your way. Okay? So another scenario here, and notice there's no flowchartiness. There is a sense of time. There's something that's interesting about the sense of this, then this, then this, then this. It's one of those things where you definitely want to use it while you're designing, because it's easier to think of a conversation flowing that way, and it's easy to understand where there are gaps and breaks, and it is how people are going to experience your stuff. So you want to think about that. The flip side of it is, Alexa doesn't really care about the time, because it's just basically saying, the user said this, and this is the situation, so here's what we're going to do. So in fact, all of these shapes in these storyboards, you can shuffle them all up, throw them on the floor, and pick one up, and it still works. It doesn't matter where it is in the context of everything. These are more to illustrate to us, this is a happy path that I want to make sure works really well. So I'm going to go nail this one. Here's another one. Now it's the 5th time I've come in. I launched the skill. Hey, welcome, 5 times in a row. That was amazing. Hey, I know there was an assignment from last time. How was CU Boulder? Oh, there's a 4 out of 5. Glad you liked it. What degree are you interested in? Engineering. Awesome. That helps a lot. So rating, we're like setting something. We took a value and we set it to that assignment. So now I know that school is a 5. And then engineering is about refining our searches more. And then now I'm going to give you a new assignment, so I'm whittling down possibilities, give you an assignment, and I play your premium content. All right. Again, happy path. If everybody stays on the happy path, everything's good and happy. But what if they don't? And that's where we want to delight people. So this is where I put on my break it hat, right? Like, okay, I'm going to screw this thing up, and we're going to do some other stuff. So let's go through the scenario. I launched the skill. Wow, great streak. How was CU Boulder? It was a 2 out of 5. Oh, let's keep looking. It's cool. What size of a school are you looking for? Okay, because as a designer, I want to keep refining the search, so I keep prompting to be refined, right? I say, what size do you want to be? And they say, what's my favorite school? So they didn't answer the question in any way. They just said, what's my favorite school? Well, and I know from my logic, I have a list of schools, and I have a list of how they've been rating them, and I say, well, CSU is your favorite school right now. Would you like to learn more about CSU? So my designed experience there is to help you like filter in if you want to. And then they say, I'm looking for a school with a great archery program. So now we're back into the refining thing, because that's helping me narrow my list down. And I say, okay, we got a new school for you, it's ASU. Do you want to hear your premium content, right? You start playing your premium content. Now notice, the user didn't say anything on these last ones. We just sort of ran through and did it. So we just concatenate together. I want a great archery school. Okay, great, we found ASU for you. Come back tomorrow and we're going to rate it. Check out your podcast. Did you know ASU is a great archery school? You did know that? Okay, good. John's from the ASU. Oh. All right. Now, that's all good and fine and hunky-dory, but how does it actually work under the covers? So let's take a look at one of those shapes and blow it out. Start talking about it. So in particular, we're going to look at the triangle shape. All right. So this is a case where I want to gather a bunch of information from the user, and I want to get down to an answer. right? So if it's plan the trip, I want to know where you're going, when you're going, what are you doing when you get there, all that kind of stuff. In this case, it's what are the characteristics of your university that you're looking for, and then I can get you an answer. So we come into the top of this. First thing is, I'd like a small school in Colorado as an utterance. So we moved from the intent level thing you saw in the previous slides. Now we're moving into the utterance levels. And there should be many utterances that go along with every intent, right? And this particular utterance is a refined search intent, and I got a location and a size out of it, okay? Who knows what the prompt was? Maybe it was like, where do you want to go? A small school in Colorado. Cool, they over-answered, I'll take it, right? So I got that detail. So I have enough to call my API now, right? I could have other required slots. If I had more required slots, what would happen is it would say, Colorado, nice. So I'm responding to that. And I have a variety of like templates of how I would respond when they give me a valid slot. So one case I might say value great, which is this one. Or I could just say okay, or great, or that helps narrow it down. Or I can just leave it blank. I don't have to always implicitly confirm what's going on, right? I could even explicitly confirm, where I would say, did you say Colorado? Are you sure this is what you want? And we could explicitly confirm it, right? So we tend to do like an implicit confirmation here, but even nothing is fine at this stage. All right, then, if we have all the requirements, then what we're gonna do is give a new assignment. So a new assignment would be your assignment is CSU, blah, blah, blah. So we basically, this portion of the skill doesn't have to know anything about what an assignment is, what the next assignment is, any of that kind of stuff. It just says, hey, new assignment engine, go figure out a prompt for me. And it can go do that. In fact, if you step up one behind this, you might have said, hey, refine search thing, I need a prompt from you. And it would go through and go like, degree. Because we don't have a degree yet. So it would go like, cool, I'll do the degree. All right, what would you like to do? Now, if we don't have all the required stuff, it would just keep going through this thing with prompts for the next slot. So it would say, like, imagine we don't have anything yet. Wow, it's drawing everything. Back. Oh, it's off too. I can't make that smiley face. All right, that's supposed to be a smiley face right there. So cool. That's a smiley face. I think it's a smiley face.
It's called error management.
All right, so if I didn't have these things, it would go through and be like, oh, I need the state, now I need the size, whatever it goes, right? So inside of your shape, you can define exactly how that is and how you might want it to work. It's going to be really cool when that stays on the next slide, too. Yeah. Awesome. All right, so that was one shape. You have magic pins. You know what to do with this? Yes. Ooh.
More technology.
You got it. Redo, nice.
Just leave it.
Just leave it. We'll let time out. Okay. Yeah, dead for the win. Okay, so you can imagine having a wide range of shapes. In fact, I don't think there's a predefined set of shapes. I think you guys will come up with your own and do all sorts of things, right? Let's talk through a couple that I've thought of so far. One is, I'm giving one piece of information and I want to expand that out. The simplest skills right now are things like, give me a fact. That's the kind of shape for that. Say, give me a fact, here comes wide range of crazy facts. This one here, the arrows is like, set something, right? Like, I now have a rating, you're on a new level, you're on whatever, blah, 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 let's get it set. Another one is I have a whole bunch of information, I'm gonna pick one to give you, based on whatever criteria, some sort of like ranking algorithm. The upside down triangle is that filtering one. You've given a bunch of information, now it's filtered down to one. The question mark one, so this would be like for a trivia game. So you can imagine, when you open up this trivia game one, like a Q&A, right? You open up the Q&A shape, it's gonna look very different than the last one. The last one had slots and some conditions for the next thing. The trivia one is gonna say something like, here's the current question, and then here are the possible answers for this. And if I get something that is a slot value that is a correct answer, I'm gonna respond with a woohoo, good job, and I'm gonna increment the points. If I get something that's a wrong answer, I'm going to go, good try. Or I'm going to go, haha, you suck. And then I'm going to move on to the next question, right? And then every time you come into one of those questions, I'm going to increment it. In fact, if I miss the question, I could choose to say, just re-ask the same question again, but now with only the 2 choices that they haven't given, right? And then now I decrement how many points you get when you get it right. So like that one shape can encapsulate those concepts on it. And you don't need to have the flow chart of like, here's a question, if it's wrong, do this, if it's right, and you start to go through all the possible branching things. You can just put it through and logically write it out, right? And then there's things like settings, general settings, like what level are you on, like general context, right, that would give you access. So in the quiz game thing, it would say like, there are 5 questions in this quiz. There are 2 players in this game, that kind of stuff. So that then your quiz logic would go like, I'm on question 3 of 5. I'm on question 4 of 5. I'm on question 5 of 5. Congrats, game's over. Here's what happens, right? The situation now changes, and so you can respond differently because you understand the situation. Monetization, so you have the ability to buy entitlements, so you can like unlock chapter 3 or unlock this new level or something like that. Or you could like get subscriptions. You say, I want to subscribe to this content, and now I get newer, cooler stuff. And then there's like play media. Like just I want to listen to this music now or whatnot. I think there are others. I think there's a few around interactive fiction. And I also think these can be composed. I could imagine building pretty complex skills where you might say, if you got the answer correct to this quiz game, then do a filter down what you prompt for planning your trip. Like you can only plan the trip if you got the quiz right, or something like that. It's a little bit weird, but that's okay. Does that make sense? Know the idea there? Okay. And then we're getting to the Q&A. I'm gonna go kind of fast, so we have a few minutes for questions. No matter what you do, no matter what tools you use, no matter what constructs you use to design and capture your design artifact, always talking it through and listening to it is a key thing. I can't tell you how often I've typed up a script and gone, masterpiece, this is beautiful. And then I play it, I'm like, total, terrible, gotta redo it. So I'm very often copying and pasting stuff into the simulator where I can just hear it, speak, but also just, you talk with people and you go, they didn't say that at all, that's not how it goes. So doing a lot of that kind of thing, I think is important no matter what you do. All right. So super quick recap. Be adaptable. So this is where you let the person speak the way they want to speak, and you adapt to them. Right? This is the first time where we're not like, our technology doesn't have to bend, or we don't have to bend to our technology. We don't have to learn how to use the mouse and like hunch over it and all that kind of stuff. Now it's, we say what we want to say and our technology should respond. And it's up to us to actually make that work out. Being personal, this is where it's like, it's just constantly, continuously understanding the conversation and moving forward so that we can progress together. And then the next one is being accessible. So this is where you want to make sure that people can use the aspects of your skill that they want to use, and they don't have to like hunt down into the deep bowels of menu systems. And then be relatable. So this is the ability to let them not have to bark an entire set of commands at you all in one go, but you can like negotiate back and forth and keep working with them. And you can tailor that experience to the kind of thing you're trying to do, whether it be gather a bunch of information from you, or help you get to a particular point, or help you answer questions, or do those kinds of things. So with that, I would love to hear thoughts, questions. Okay. And by the way, reach me anytime, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatnot. I'd love to keep chatting more and more and more. Well, any thoughts? Yeah.
So one question I didn't see addressed had to do with cultural sensitivity, specifically around icons. You know, what does that icon mean? I don't know. In my language, we don't know what that is.
Totally. Like in all those shapes thing I drew? Yeah, I don't know either, and I think those ones are probably the wrong ones. They're just the ones that struck me first when I was at 2 o'clock last night trying to redo those. I keep going through different variations. I don't think there's like meant to be an industry standard for it yet. I think it's meant like, if I could spark this conversation of like, how do you think your skill feels? This came out of, the shapes thing, came out of 2 different conversations. One was, long ago, I was thinking, man, voice, it's kind of a bummer because there's no there's no common controls. There's no like dialog box. There's no list combo box. Like there's not the sense that you have with GUI stuff, right? And so, well, we should do that. So what are the design patterns? And I started thinking about, oh, there's a branching design pattern, and there's a few different things. Then I got talking with Catherine Alexandra, and she was like, I do the happy path stuff, but then I back up and I go like, what's the shape of this thing? And I'm like, that is great. Like you get the sense of like, what can this skill do just by getting a feel for the shape of it? And so those two things together sort of just brought me to the shape thing. You know, at the end of the day, they could be plugins or something else, but
Sure.
I'm sort of vibing on the shapes thing right now. It helps me remember what they are for. So when you collapse them up into the very thin storyboards, you still get a feel for what's happening.
And potentially you can make that part of the introduction that, you know, for this skill, and I'm paraphrasing, but you say,
Yeah.
for this skill, the red dot or the square means,
Yep.
or you could describe it.
Yep, totally. Yep, we'll go here in a minute.
So I find it really interesting to find other ways of creating a schema for the conversation.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much at Amazon, for example, are you bringing linguists or sociologists into the conversation with technologists to understand, well, how do we map conversation?
Yeah.
And how can we continue to work together to think more creatively about this new world of mapping conversations in this way?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak at the community level, maybe instead of a particular company level. But I think deep in the heart of everything that's getting built right now has that linguistic component. You can see it in the kinds of things that are happening, that are sort of percolating right now. Now, I think there's also pushes in different places. Like there's definitely a, hey, developers, this is easy for you to do. Hey, you know, designers, let's get in here. And so I've seen like actors and story writers and all sorts of people getting involved. And I'm particularly loving this conference because look at the kind of folks who've got people thinking about business of voice. We've got people thinking about the creativity of voice. We've got people about expressivity. We've got people about coding, like all those pieces. And I actually think that it's about the community. And if you think back to that very beginning part where it's like, who is going to make the future? I believe it's going to be an indie. I think indies are the ones who make everything happen in the world, like new music, new movies, new books, new stuff, right? And somebody is going to come out and say, Angry Birds, and like they're huge now, but they weren't then, right? And so somebody's going to come along and they're going to catch it, and then it's going to go crazy. And so I think it's about the community, and I think it's about attracting all those right kinds of folks to get it together. Question here.
Yeah, so I'm a person who built Flowcharts, so seeing
Yes.
this approach is definitely interesting.
Yes.
By
the way, that's the industry standard right now. That's
Yeah.
the best practice to do that,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, I get that they can be taken as too deterministic, and
Yeah.
you have to have things in the right order.
Yeah.
If you look at them pattern-wise, they're not necessarily as
I agree.
that way. But I'm wondering in your situations how you handle things like when a user, you're asking them what state they want to maybe start with a state, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know what state. Like,
Yeah.
I have no idea. I'm
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
college junior, or I'm a high school junior, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
So all of those little like guardrails or edges that you need to like bump users back into, like, okay, well, like, do you want to travel far or do you want to stay close? Like, that you kind of get them deeper
Totally.
into these other cases.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you don't use a flowchart to kind of direct them to those areas and kind of continuing to just write massive, massive logic.
Let me.
Also seems cumbersome.
No, totally. I'm going to show you a slightly different look on this real quick, just to show you that one very specific example. So this is another way of visualizing how this goes. All right, so same whole scenario now, but just a different visualization instead of using all those shapes. All right, so the blue is what the user said, start college coach, and then I respond, and then I give a prompt, right? This is the very first time, hey, we're gonna get ready for college, where would you like to go to school? Then they say, I don't know, right? Exactly what you said. And by the way, this is part of the reason I love this approach, because once I get those basic storyboards, now it's about just beat it. Like, what can you do? What can you do? Break it, we'll all throw it in there. So that's what happened here. We said, I don't know. So then we said, well, some slot values help us actually refine the search. I don't know does nothing for us. So then we had a discussion. What do we do in this case? Do we dictate that they give us the thing, or do we go, cool, ask the next question, right? In our case, we said we don't really care because we just want to progressively render the thing. So we said, whenever we hear I don't know, or I don't care, or whatever, or any of those, we call it teen angst, then we said, we're just going to move on. But you could say, I'm going to reprompt. And in fact, we did reprompt because we said, where would you like to go to school the first time? Which we intended to be pretty vague, right? I could say a state, I could say a region, I could say a specific school, right? We were kind of just hoping to catch whatever your mindset is, right? Then they said, I don't know. Then we said, is there a state that you're curious about? So it's actually the same question, it's just now phrased completely differently, hoping to pinpoint where they're gonna go. And then they go, oh, Colorado. So they don't know where they're gonna go. We're just like, are you curious about one? Where's the state you're curious about? So that's how we were sort of like being able to gather those things, because you're just getting your prompt engine to run. So the sidebar here, by the way, is the dots that are helping us remember. There's still missing information, you've got an assignment, you don't have an assignment, whatnot. And so you can think of these as lines to other things, but it turns out you can, so far, I've always been able to delete the lines, and it still works.
So I'm curious about your file structure now, because are you nesting these diagrams? Like the I don't know has to be contextual to the I don't know that they're responding to, right? So that would only have to be under that question.
It's part of
Or
refined
it's
search.
nested.
It's part of refined search, yeah. So we have a refined search thing, and that's part of that.
Cool.
You can have a top level I don't know as well,
Yeah.
but that would be different than the one that's in the yes no is a very common thing for this. You can say yes no in this context versus yes no global. So yeah, you would nest the situation where I got a yes while I'm doing a refined search. Yep. It is a bit abstract. I'm gonna go over here in the back of the yep.
Is there anything that you are aware of right now that is attempting to define some of these terms and standardize, like UML, I'm thinking, and I think a lot of the challenge with flowcharts is we're just missing some of the cases and maybe the common terms that everybody's aware of. I think, like it was Socrates, it says the beginning of knowledge starts with a definition of terms, and like everybody calls these things something different.
Yep.
Anything that you're aware of?
Little bits. So first of all, I'm calling it situational design. Like instead of responsive design for the voice, it's situational design. Like you are designing for the situation. We'll see if that becomes a thing or not, but like that's how I'm thinking of it. I think every toolmaker that I've seen, they have gone beyond flowcharts, right? You can tell their genesis was a flowchart, but then they thought about, I need to have a way to return without having to draw the lines. I need to have a way to pop you out of one and into another. So there's a concept of a global intent. They're all working around the edges. And when you talk to the designers of those tools, they get it. And they realize where the pain points are. They're always working on them. So I think there's I just feel like there's a gravity towards it. I feel like the designers, very often when they see this, it resonates with them. And then there's always a sense of like, whew, okay, how do I adopt that, right? So I think we're at that phase where it's sort of accumulating a mass.
But do you know of any so I'll use UML as the example, where there's the standard and then the tooling kind of works around that standard?
I don't know of any standard like that right now. And most of the things that I've seen that attempt to do those kinds of things tend to be Debbie-focused things and not designery-focused things. And so I'm at the moment just playing very extreme where I stand off of all of those things because I think once we figure out a great design practice, the devs will follow. They can do whatever. We just need to figure out how we get to this. And so I hope that sprouts up out of the design world more than the dev world will be there, of course, but yeah. We have here.
So I'm wondering whether empathy or understanding emotion is part of the roadmap or the idea to keep her referential.
Yeah, the question was, is empathy or understanding emotion on part of the roadmap for Alexa? Well, I don't have anything I can talk about with future stuff, but I've seen people do things. I've seen people go call other services, so you can basically take what's going on and call services. Like the winner of the South by Southwest hackathon, maybe last year, I think it was 2 years ago now, they did something where you talked to Alexa and then it called the API and said, here's the music for your situation. Like it would play happy music.
No, but it's more like emotional API. Like do you know that works that are trying to understand emotion in speech?
Yeah.
Or is there an idea to have Alexa be more empathetic? This conversation is, you're
Yeah.
And that the area will always be there. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I don't really know, but I think we're passionate about this whole space and just continuously investing. So wherever we can go as fast as we can get is kind of where it goes. But it makes a lot of sense to do that here. It's a great scenario. I forget where the next question was. Are we done? Okay, cool. I will be here hanging out. I would love to chat with you more. And please, I think over the next month, 2 months, 3 months, I'd love to have more deep design. I'd love to see where you bump into problems and like let's hash through them. It'd be awesome. Thank you very much.